Hi everyone, it's Lauren and welcome back to my series on Shakespeare. I have done a whole range of videos on this topic, from how to read Shakespeare to individual videos on lots of his plays. So if you're interested in any of those, I will leave a link to the series in the description box below. Today we're going to be talking about Julius Caesar. This is thought to be one of Shakespeare's earliest performed plays and is of course about the downfall and assassination of Julius Caesar, although it's not really about him. The play grapples with a number of different themes which we'll go into later, but it mainly focuses on the internal wranglings of Julius Caesar, but also Brutus, Cassius and later Mark Antony. So we'll start with a very brief summary of the plot. Shakespeare plays are never simple by nature, but I will attempt to give a high-level summary and then we'll go into some of the more themes and interesting motifs in the play. The opening context for the play is that Rome has previously been ruled by a republic, but slowly throughout Julius Caesar's reign, he has infiltrated the Senate, filled it with people who he likes, and more enrobing himself with the trappings of an emperor or a dictator. So when the play begins, the crowd is celebrating Julius Caesar's defeat of Pompey, who is a political rival at his, and some of the other tribunes think this is very worrying because we're not celebrating Rome's defeat of a foreign force. This is somebody else who was very powerful in Rome as well, and they see this turning into Caesar's grab for power, and he's trying to oust all of his enemies. The celebrations and the roars of the crowd happen generally off stage, but then we get to Cassius, who is somebody else in the Senate, trying to persuade Brutus that things are going too far. Brutus is a character who is very noble, he's friendly with Caesar, and Cassius is trying to persuade him that for the good of the people, for the good of Rome, we need to assassinate this guy. He is dangerous, he's turning into a dictator. We can't have that. In the course of this discussion, something else that happens off stage is that we hear that Mark Antony, who is a follower of Caesar, has offered him the crown and Caesar has refused. So 3 times Mark Antony is offering him to become king of Rome, and Julius Caesar keeps saying no, and the crowd is cheering him on for it, but it feels like this is all pretense, that really Caesar does want that crown, and he's trying to downplay his real ambitions. Cassius and his co-conspirators group together to send forged letters to Brutus from the people of Rome, trying to persuade him that the Romans are very worried about Caesar and asking him to take action. Brutus is persuaded by this and believes that is really the will of the people, and they all gather together and agree to murder him on the 15th of March. In the meantime, Caesar has had a parade, a soothsayer or a fortune teller has come up to him and uttered the famous line, "Beware the Ides of March," which is the 15th, the middle of the month. Caesar's wife Calpurnia also has premonitions that something bad will happen to him if he goes to the Senate, but believing in himself as this divine creature, powerful creature, Caesar goes anyway, and as we all know, is assassinated by all of these people in the Senate. After the murder, the conspirators, mainly Brutus, believing that what they have done is right and for the good of the people, give themselves up, and they say freely to the people of Rome that we have done this for you. This is Mark Antony, Caesar's friend. He's going to speak as well with our permission. We're all on board with this, and you know, we're not murderers, we're just doing it for everybody else and for the good of the Republic. But when Mark Antony does speak, he does defer to the conspirators in the way that is previously agreed, but he actually very subtly manages to twist the crowd around, and this is his famous speech that begins, "Friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears." He talks about all the good that Caesar did for the people and very skillfully manages to change the tide of opinion, and they all kind of uprise and are very upset about Caesar's death, even though moments before they had almost been on Brutus's side about this great republic. So this starts a complete civil war. Brutus and Cassius go into hiding. Mark Antony assumes control of the Senate with 2 other people, Octavius, Caesar's adopted son, and Marcus Lepidus. And in the meantime, things are kind of going wrong between Brutus and Cassius. There's a lot of introspection about whether what they did was right and whether what they did was noble. In the first battle against Rome, Cassius ends up killing himself because he hears his best friend has been captured, but then his best friend hasn't been captured and kills himself when he finds Cassius dead. Classic Shakespearean mix-up. And in the second battle, just as he's losing, Brutus decides it is better to kill himself than to be captured, and we end the play with Mark Antony's speech over Brutus's body, calling him the most noble of Romans. So there's a lot of death, a lot of twists and turns and political machinations, and it's interesting in this play, considering it is about assassination. It grapples a lot with the meaning of murder and whether it's noble and whether people can change their own fates. There's a lot of talk in the play, considering it's one of the most bloody plays. So some of the themes that this play covers, most obviously power is one of the big themes in the play, but it's the different types of power and the ways that power manifests, which is really being examined here. We have political power, which at this point is being abused by Caesar, but we also have Cassius, who's trying to exert power over Brutus, power over the other conspirators to overthrow Julius Caesar. He's not friends with Caesar, so it's whether he's doing this for noble reasons or just because he doesn't like Caesar. Brutus himself ends up being manipulated by Cassius, but also by this supposed will of the people when Cassius forges all the letters to try and convince Brutus that the people want this. He is then very quickly persuaded to kill someone who is his friend, actually. And you could argue whether Brutus has enough power over his own convictions. His wife begs him to tell her what he's thinking, what he's planning, but he doesn't in the end. He's trying to work it all out himself, and he makes a lot of bad choices throughout the play. So it's whether he is being driven by a wider force, or even just the higher power of the will of the people of Rome, or what he thinks the will of the people is. Then of course there's a difference between the power of the fates as opposed to people, like who's really in control with what happens to us and in our futures. There's a lot of instances where Julius Caesar is given signs that things might not be good for him if he goes to the Senate on the 15th of March. There's obviously the fortune teller, his wife, who says that has a vision and she doesn't want him to go there. There's also strange things happening in Rome, like really bad weather and a lion giving birth in the street and things like that. So there's a lot of like supernatural signs occurring, which is similar to kind of what happens in Macbeth, which suggests that there are supernatural / higher godly powers at work. But Caesar disregards all of these things, and he so believes in his own power as this dictator, as this amazing person, that he kind of forgets his own weakness, his own physical weakness in his body, and how vulnerable he actually is to somebody hurting him. He's almost like he's believing his own hype in a way, and believes that he is unbreakable and can't be killed. There's also the argument that Cassius uses at the beginning of the play to try and persuade Brutus that Caesar can be stopped in his tracks and that they are the people to do it, which is men at some time were masters of their fates. The fault, dear Brutus, is not in our stars, but in ourselves, that we are underlings. And he's trying to say that, we can't blame this on fate. Like it's us, it's our failure to act, which is causing this situation. However, that idea is played out throughout the play. There are a lot of bad signals and signs that the stars are the fates that something bad is going to happen. But what is that thing? Is it that Caesar was always going to be killed at the Senate and everybody was driving towards this point? Or could he have avoided that if he hadn't have gone, if he'd read the signs? Could he have not been killed? Before the battles that occur between Brutus Cassius and Mark Antony, Brutus receives a visitation of Caesar's ghost, which says he will meet him soon. So is what happens later to Brutus and Cassius the will of this ghost of Caesar? Is it revenge, or is it that was always going to happen? Afterwards, at the end of this play, Mark Antony does take over Rome with his triumvirate. So, this republic which they were trying to protect doesn't exist. Rome then has emperors from that point onwards. So it's really a question of where the fates are leading to and who the main actors are and if they actually have free will or not. A couple of associated ideas with the theme of power is the idea of the split between the personal and the public. So this is mistakes that Julius Caesar and Brutus both make, in that Caesar cannot distinguish himself, the vulnerable human being, from this idea that he has in public of this all-powerful emperor, and therefore underestimates his vulnerability. Brutus, at the same time, cannot distinguish his own personal self, so his love for his wife, his love for Caesar as his friend, between what he believes the greater good is. There's some arguments that happen between Brutus and Cassius during the Civil War section, where Brutus is accusing Cassius of taking bribes, and Brutus is quite unaware of his own foibles as a human being, and he sort of believes that he is always so noble and working for the greater good, but is a bit of a hypocrite that he's working with Cassius and accuses Cassius of taking bribes, which he then won't take himself, but then he also wants Cassius to give him money. So it's this inability to kind of look at yourself as an actor, as a human being who has personal flaws and personal ambitions as separate and distinct to this idea of the greater good. And then linking back to this idea of fate and whether any of these incidents could have been avoided is the fact that there are a lot of signs which occur throughout the play which are misinterpreted, and a lot of things that happen within the play basically are due to characters misunderstanding information, misconstruing what is going on. For example, Brutus not recognising the forgery of these letters that are coming to him, Caesar not quite understanding what the fortune teller is trying to tell him. Later on, when Caesar is already dead and the conspirators, including Brutus, decide, we'll stay here and we'll let Mark Antony speak and the people will love us for it. They've completely misinterpreted the mood of the people, whereas Mark Antony has correctly identified the mood of the people and is able then to bend that to his will successfully. Finally, a bit of context for the play, which I find quite interesting, is that this was written in the waning years of Queen Elizabeth I's reign in England, and she'd been on the throne for nearly 4 decades. She hadn't identified an heir, refused to, and also there had been several attempts on her life. So it's quite interesting, the timing of this play. It's an interesting comment on this idea of whether you should have a monarchy or absolute power, or whether a republic would work. So remember, there is government at this time in England, but it's pre-Civil War, so like the Queen has a lot more power than anyone did post that revolutionary period. So an interesting question would be, what is Shakespeare arguing here, if he's arguing anything at all, to be fair, as to what is best, absolute power or a republic? Brutus tries nobly to restore a republic, but the people of Rome reject that and immediately go to Mark Antony. I don't think we ever come to a landing on what is a better system of rule, but within this play it is clear to see that if an assassination attempt happens, you can see the destruction and absolute chaos which occurs after that, which is possibly the mood that Shakespeare is drawing off of. So that's a lot of discussion points there, a lot of different ideas kind of packed in. I would love to keep talking about it with you in the comments if you're interested. I have seen one production of Julius Caesar, which was Phila Deloyd's all-female version starring Harriet Walter, which was really amazing. It was set in a women's prison, and the idea was the prisoners were putting on Julius Caesar, and I loved those adaptations that they did as part of that group, but I haven't seen any others, so I would love to have some recommendations from you in the comments below on any adaptations that you'd recommend that I see, and also any requests for other plays that you'd like me to film a video on, and I'll see you next time. Bye!